Hello and welcome to the Dolby Institute podcast. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you will find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Today we are continuing our Academy Awards coverage with a discussion of Damien Chazelle's epic film about Hollywood's transition from the silent era to the talkies, Babylon. If you haven't seen the film yet, it is the exact opposite of a silent film, as it features an unbelievably complex sound design and mix appropriate for such a bombastic film about the Hollywood experience. Joining us today is re-recording mixer, sound designer, and supervising sound editor Ai-Ling Lee, supervising sound editor Mildred Iatrou Morgan, and production sound mixer Steve Morrow. Unfortunately, two-time Academy Award-winning re-recording mixer Andy Nelson, and friend of this show, was feeling a bit under the weather and wasn't able to join us, so he had to skip today's recording, but we wish him a speedy recovery. But do not worry. This is a very spirited conversation about the intricacies and challenges of the recording and crafting of such a complex track. If you've seen the film before, you know that it has probably what I would categorize as the most explosive beginning of a film that I have seen in a long time. So that's where we started our conversation, talking about the unforgettable elephant sequence.
The opening, scene, this whole opening sequence, it is important, to set the tone, as you said, for the film. And with the early conversations with Damien, he wanted the soundscape of Babylon to feel like real, visceral, and a little larger than life. He basically, one of the first things that, he told us, like on the first day of the final mix, was like, he wanted to, the whole opening of the movie up until, the title credit, is to, shatter any cliches associated with that time period. Even though it's based in the 1920s or something, it should feel a little bit more modern, and also to have this no holds barred roller coaster ride kind of feel in the movie, where everything's kind of so the audience would feel like everything's a bit larger than life, overwhelming, profane, and all kinds of things could happen, and so to start with it, we, with the whole opening scene with the elephant scene in the truck, he wanted the whole elephant event to be a little bigger than the real deal. So I had he sent me some. I saw some YouTube videos of the actual elephant business, and it wasn't really pretty big.
So you went onto YouTube, you searched elephant shit.
Yeah, I know. It is once. It's not often that we have to do that, but yeah.
I just want to know what the title of that email was from Damien. Hey, check this out.
Yeah, he actually also posted some for during pre-production. Yeah, he did posted some videos of elephants peeing and pooping stuff. I think it's for all departments, I guess, as research.
There's so much comedy in this film. And even the sound design of that poor truck that's laboring up the hill, and ultimately sliding back. It's just it's hilarious to me to find out that none of that was actually in production, because Steve, I understand that on the day they were actually towing the truck because it didn't.
Yeah. Well, it was more or less that it was more just for the safety of the crew, because we're on a pretty steep hill. And if you can imagine a 400-foot long steel cable that goes out on a crane that's 250 feet high. So this is a giant crane. It's connected to the truck, goes from the crane down to a stake bed, 2 football fields away. And the stake bed is what's pulling the entire rig up the hill together. And then you have effects guys that are blowing, leaf blowers for the dirt to make it look like the wheels are spinning out. And yeah. And I also have to say that Linus did get covered as well, our cinematographer, because somebody had to operate that camera. So I have a classic picture of Linus that probably will never be seen, but it's of him completely only dressed in a garbage bag. Only.
Part of the whole truck stuff too is we managed to find, obviously, as you mentioned, we had to replace all those engine sounds. So part of like creating the world in the 1920s, we scouted and recorded a bunch of 1920s vehicles, and one of it is we found like a 1921 and 1922 Ford Model TT truck, and we brought the vehicles to California City Airport and rented that out for the day, and to kind of mimic that old, it's almost 100-year-old engine, to mimic it, to sound like it's under load and stress going up the hill. We had the 1922 truck tow a modern day truck and recorded it.
Yeah, one of the things I love about this movie, I mean, obviously, it's a cliche to call it a love letter to movies, but I loved how Babylon depicts film production during the silent era in the 20s, and specifically, I love that kind of the sequence toward the opening where we kind of tour around the Kinescope movie set where they're shooting multiple films at the same time. Obviously it's silent, so they don't have to worry about capturing production audio. So it's just chaos. You've got a live orchestra playing for some of these sequences. And so, Steve, I remember from our last conversation about La La Land that Damien usually sets you up with some pretty interesting dilemmas. I remember you describing to us just how complicated it was to shoot that opening freeway song and dance sequence in La La Land. So talk to us about this Kinescope set experience. And you had, how many extras were out there?
We had hundreds, but that was our first day of shooting too. So it wasn't like we eased in, Almost all movies do that, right? The studio is going to pay this huge amount of money. They want to see something big on the screen on first day. They don't want to see two people sitting in a chair talking. So you end up shooting these giant sequences before the cast and crew know each other, which is great, but which adds to the to the energy of the set. But yeah, that was a day where we had each. So that was one big shot of her coming through and seeing, her POV and going all the way around Kinescope as they're filming the 5 different sets there. And Justin had the different music for each set that was playing at the same time. So we would break those out into different channels on Pro Tools so that they were always playing, so that when the camera passed by them, they were already going, but they each had their own channel that they could hear their specific sound, their music in their set. Even though it'll play all over each other, but there were people with lines and dialogue, and the Count was there trying to peddle his drugs and whatnot. So you had to make sure that you had everything, all the extras mic'd, or not the extras, I'm sorry, but all the cast mic'd, and then each set had its own little soundtrack that was playing so that they could play along. And then when it came to Nellie's set, we set up mics on the drum kit for the band so that not to record to use, but to record for reference to sync up, because drums are hard to find if it's, 1/60th of a second. But if you put a mic on it, you can see where it's going, so they can line up the music that way. But yeah, Damien's challenge is always, on this film especially, he wants the dialogue to feel real. He wants overlaps. He wants, the goal was to mic everybody in every scene. Even if you don't have dialogue, you're going to say something, guarantee it, because Damien's thing was, this is great, but let's go bigger. I think Margot Robbie had a story where she said, I put everything out there. I was going crazy. And he walked over and I thought, oh, that's it. He's going to tell me to tone it back. And he goes, okay, can you go a little bigger than that? And I think that was kind of the idea behind the whole film. It's like, let's go bigger. Let's go bolder. Let's go beyond what's reasonable. And then we can pull back from there, but let's just see where that line is. And so that's how we treated it on production. We just went as extreme as we could.
So how many mic inputs were you dealing with? It sounds just insane.
Yeah, on that day, I think Millie and I counted up. I think it was 19 or 20. So it wasn't.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, which sounds like a lot, but modern day filmmaking, when you're doing these bigger films, that's a fairly reasonable amount. So it wasn't wasn't an overwhelming amount, but like, when we were on the battle scene and there was a major orchestra there, normally what you would do is just blast that music out and the orchestra would play along to it and the scene would happen, and that's how you'd get everybody in sync. But what we decided to do, because Millie and Ai-Ling wanted to send Jeff, and who else was sent out, the effects guys?
Basically, I had sent out John Fasal, effects recordist, and Tim Walston. He's an effects editor, designer who helped us on recording.
They came out to set because, I went to production and went to Damien and said, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to earwig, give everybody an earpiece in the orchestra so they can play along, but we don't have to blast out of speakers, so that we can record the effects of this 1,000 people running at each other as much as we can, because that's going to be hard to redo later. And then knowing that we had an effects team coming, it's like, well, we're not going to blast them out and make their day worthless all day. So, it's more work and it was harder, but I think it adds to the realism of the movie, because it is, in the soundtrack, as chaotic as the movie is, it still needs to be grounded somewhere in reality. So you have to provide the audience with that.
So those little orchestras are live performing on set, and you captured that. And is that what we're hearing in the final mix?
No, actually, they're just they're miming along to a pre-record. Okay. Yeah. But we're giving them earpieces so that they can mime perfectly in time, and then that's it. The only thing that was live recorded, performance or song wise, was the "My Girl's Pussy" song,
right?
That she sang live. But the instruments, the instrumentation was done later. We had
that song. That song was used to. It was actually a song from the 1920s.
Oh, really?
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it was played. I think it's played later in the movie. In the history of film part of the ending of the movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, when the girl was out cold in the opening party scene, when she overdosed.
Yeah, I want to get to that. I want to get to that opening party scene in a minute. But Mildred, I wanted to ask you. Obviously, you've got all this material coming in from Steve and set. What was your approach to handling all the production tracks?
Well, yeah, that was like the first scene that I was sent from Tom Cross, the picture editor, and so I get his AAFs, which are what he has in his Avid, and it was like 20 tracks of chaos, because everything was going the whole time, and so he needed me to do a pass. Well, basically, I did a pass on sorting through it, because I had to figure out what do we need to hear and when do we need to hear it, because we have the production, everything. Because of all the playback, all the dialogue had, even though it was, mic'd, everybody had their own mics, all the main characters, everything was tied to music. And so that was fun. I mean, I went through and just got rid of what I didn't need and put handles on it. And then at that first pass early on, I did some noise reduction to try to get some of the music, some of the playback out. And then I passed it on to Ai-Ling, who then panned it, because she was adding some a lot of sound effects actually, because of all the things that's going on in the background and in the foreground. And then she wanted to pan the dialogue along with her sound effects, and then subsequently. So some of the extras were mic'd, because the ladies who run by and shouting, they were mic'd, but some of them, obviously couldn't be mic'd. So later on with Loop Group, I went in and added stuff, and I'll pass it on to Ai-Ling now, because I know she did some stuff on that too. Everybody worked on that sequence. It was really fun, because Steve recorded it. I started cleaning it up. Ai-Ling worked on it. Then she did a mix on it. And then during the final mix, Andy had to put the real music in and do work on the mix some more. So
the idea about creating chaos is sometimes not just about adding more. It's about what say, it's a film set, right? And so I may add some walla that is of off-screen walla of people fighting or hollering like they are on a battle or something, and some cows mooing and chickens clucking. Things that you may not quite expect from a regular film set that we also see, but sonically, besides showing what we see, but adding some other elements that hopefully subliminally would kind of bring it even more over the top to us. That helps create that sense of chaos.
I appreciate you using that word chaos, Ai-Ling, and certainly I would describe the aesthetic of Babylon as kind of more is more. And certainly it's that way from a visual perspective. And you mentioned earlier the party scene, which is just this gigantic set piece that happens towards the opening of the film. Now, obviously, more is not something that necessarily works really well for sound. So I would love to have you guys talk about your approach to kind of guiding and shaping the soundtrack of the film, maybe talking about that party sequence as an example. Steve, I mean, obviously, I'm sure, your job was just to capture everything possible and deliver that on, right?
Yeah, and the idea in that party scene is that, we would have all the dancers, everybody, all the musicians would have earwigs as well, so that we could capture all the extras and actors coming in and out of the scene as they're talking. And at the same time, we also had Nellie Leroy on a separate audio channel so she could dance to the song that she wanted to dance to, which was not the song that was played in the movie, because it wanted to be this different type of dance so that everybody was drawn to her. So that was the challenge there, where that was the Ace Hotel downtown LA in the lobby that was dressed for that. And that was, a massive amount. I think it was a week-long party that we did, to create all that. And there's also something in there. There's literally a cow that walks through the party, and you only see it for like 5 frames. And Millie and Ai-Ling did a great job in adding that sound, because when we're working and we're mixing, we're doing the thing, I hear a cow and I'm like, where's that coming from? I look over look over my shoulder, and there's a cow just walking through the set. And it only happened one take. And it was like, who brought a cow to downtown LA and walked it through the Ace Hotel lobby? But, we did. So, yeah. So it was good to like emphasize it with sound. Otherwise, yeah. But then the goal was always get the dialogue as the best you can, the cleanest you can, even though there's a party, but also remind people there's a party. So speak up,
Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of dialogue going on. You got loud music. You got, you had to put the sound effects of the cow in there. Ai-Ling, can you talk us through, obviously, you mixed the film with Andy Nelson. Can you talk about just shaping? How do you present the audience with that much information, and what's your approach to kind of shaping it and guiding the audience through it?
For the mix, like say this opening party sequence, one of the big driver of the whole sequence is Justin's music. That Damien and Tom edited the whole picture with, and what Andy does during the final mix, because the soundtrack for Babylon, the mix is very dynamic, and but of course, Andy and I we want to make sure yes, it's great to be loud, but you don't want it heard. So during the final
and also
mix,
you got a 3-hour movie, so you have to make sure. You have to give the audience a little bit of a rest, right?
Yeah. So what Andy does is when he mixes the music, say for that sequence, he would kind of like find, the peak of it, right? And kind of set that. And so we'll kind of work around that. And partially, to make the music feel like, big and full bodied and stuff, all the sounds around it, like some of since the production had a lot of playback going on, so most of the crowd sounds in there were added in post, and also Damien also wanted to show the craziness and like things going out of control in there. So sometimes we add some like off-screen crashes or whatever. And because the shot is so dense with multiple planes of action, to help guide the audience, like maybe like where to look and stuff. And say one of the panning shots, zooming in shots, I add some if we wanted to point the audience to someone like falling, with adds like a loud crash on it, or someone tumbling down the stairs, like tumbling, falling, and a painful yelling cry. But in the mix, we always wanted to make sure that none of those sounds would sound too big versus the music, so that it gives you that illusion that the music's always like, on the foreground.
I remember talking to Andy and him saying that, as chaotic as the screen always is in Babylon, there's a certain level that you can't necessarily do that to the audience's ears, or else you just wear them out completely, and then they're going to be out of the movie. So he'd always mentioned that, it was a delicate, juggling act to make sure that the audience was still connected visually and audibly, because there's so much going on, but you can't overwhelm everything in the theater, or else you're just going to lose everybody. So there's that delicate dance that the mix really does.
Yeah, that's like only so much information your brain can process at one point. So we just have to be very specific about what we play and when.
Ai-Ling, you mentioned Justin Hurwitz's score, and obviously the music is really just so important to the film. I know that he and Damien, were college roommates, and their relationship goes way back. Did you? And I know, excuse me, I know that Justin was working very early on the music of the film and feeding tracks to editorial. Did you have access to the score while you were designing and pre-mixing, and how did that affect the process for you?
One of the great things about working on a Damien movie is with Justin and Damien, it's not often you get the composer on the films. I think Justin, sometimes he starts like even during pre-production or before that, and and so his music is pretty embedded in the structure of the film by the time I start sometimes. And so even like if I'm working in a assembly cut of the editor's assembly cut before the director's cut, they would have some cues from Justin already. It's just like, roughed out demo stuff, and later on things may kind of change a little bit. But even, as they are editing it, it's all with Justin's music, and it provides like a good guidance for me, knowing, for us, because a lot of Damien's movie are so rhythmic in every scene, and on Babylon, there's a lot of like, with like he likes to shoot it up a lot of like close-up shots of action and stuff, and doing the quick edits that Tom would do, like say off some of the film equipments and stuff, and over through Justin's music, or even or even like during the battlefield set scene, when all the extras were like going all out and filming and stabbing and like blood gushing and everything, and over the music, it allows us to know, like, hey, so we would record, period, 20 film equipment and stuff, or like the stabbing and stuff, we can like cut things to the rhythm, and also, the pitch and stuff. Even like say the crowd, right? Like the Warlock party when Nellie's dancing, and it catches Manny's attention, and he starts falling in love with her. As she dances, and then towards the end of it, we start introducing the crowd sounds. A lot of that were added, and sometimes like I may kind of like cheat it a little bit and kind of pitch the crowd like wooing and cheering like to the rhythm of the ascending of his music, because anything, as we all know, even with sound, anything that's like rhythmic and musical always works better.
One of the things that really struck me about the film is there's so many tonal shifts. We've talked about the comedy, and another great sequence for that is the snake bite sequence, which I thought was just amazing and hilarious. And then you've got the entire Tobey Maguire sequence that shows up later in the film, which is just so incredibly tense and unsettling. And I kind of wanted to chew my fingernails off while I was watching that sequence because it just was so, it was so unsettling on so many different degrees. So I'm curious what's your approach to using sound design and the mix to alter the tone of the film and to take the audience, take them out of the comedy and take them into this very dark space that the film ultimately goes into?
The Tobey Maguire scene when they go to the blockhouse, as you said, this movie, Babylon has like, is a movie with like a few different genres. You have like drama that needs to be real and gritty, and and you have some action, and you have some comedies, satirical comedies, and then you have this blockhouse scene that's kind of like takes a darker turn. That's another one of those scenes that Tom asked me to do a pass off the design during the assembly cut, and then whatever that did was like sent back into the Avid. And when Damien and Tom were editing the scene, they would like, even though by the time they get through it, like everything is like kind of jumbled up and stuff, they may repurpose the sounds that I had done to build it up, and then Justin would also add some music to some of the layers, and the motive is to make it like dark and dangerous. As they are going through all the different levels, you need to feel like you're being surrounded by these kind of a little crazy men, people, and part of it to even though we wanted the size of the crowd, but to give it a darker tone, like by the time we get to the room with the guy eating the rat, mix wise, we didn't want the crowd to be too distinct per se. So I kind of like made them a bit more mono-ish, but filled it out into the space of the room so that they feel like one big blob of body than being so separated. That's one of the things that like Damien didn't want. Damien wants to feel like it's just want a whole mass rather than like many different individuals very distinctly. And also kind of did some cheat to it and pitched down some of the crowd and stuff, and to create like and added some chanting and stuff. Then they didn't have it on set that way, just to feel like it's more like a cult. And all the drippy darkness and atmospheric tone.
That's how it was on set, dark and drippy. We were so the blockhouse was shot towards the end of production, which we were all exhausted by at that point. But there were playback tracks at that first level where the two guys are drumming and the girls are I guess blood fighting in the in the cage, and they said cut. We stopped playback, and I thought I didn't hit the button. I'm looking. I'm like, the playback is done. They're still drumming. The AD's on the walkie saying, cut, 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 cut. It took them a minute and a half to stop the crowd because they were going for it. And the cameras were done. They were walk off set, and they were just still going for it. It was like they had to bring in flashlights and turn on and off the lights. It was pure chaos. That was the blockhouse on stage. Yeah. There's also a story of the alligator who was originally hooked up to plastic chains, like you buy at the Halloween store. And first take, it kind of snapped the chain and everybody went, uh-oh. So we took a pause and got real.
Not a good idea.
It was a real alligator which was secured with plastic chains.
Yeah, real alligator that could throw you if you wanted to. It's one of those things where you're like, probably it was easier to find aged chains than to, I don't know. It was one of those things where we're all like, where'd the alligator go? And the wrangler's like, nobody move. Nobody move. Like, oh boy.
Mildred, aren't you glad to be in post and not in
Yes.
production and on set?
Absolutely. That was something I learned in film school, that shooting was fine, but I loved being in the cutting room and I loved doing sound. So I feel like I'm in the right place.
Well, obviously, no conversation about The Sound of Babylon would be complete without discussing the sequence with Margot Robbie, where she shoots her first sync sound sequence on the soundstage, which I felt to me like just a wonderful homage to Singing in the Rain. So I really enjoyed that sequence. And Steve, and on the one hand, I've never seen a production sound recordist with that much power before.
Oh, you've never been on one of our sets then, have you? That's all they give us. That's all they give us is all the power in the world. We can say cut. We can tell them to talk. Anyway, we'll do that on a different podcast. The power of sound.
And so. Yeah, and I'm sure there were times when you wanted to give direction to the actors as well, right?
Oh, all the time, every day. No, honestly, it's Lloyd. He was great. That was his first acting job, the sound guy.
Wow.
That was his first day on a set, and he was actually named after me. So it was Lloyd Morrow. It's on the slate. If it says sound by Morrow, and so maybe he's my great grandfather, in the sound business, but. It was just like, it's classic stuff that he was doing. And him and I talked and we had a great time. And I said, hey, any awards we go to, you're coming with me and you're giving the speech, cause, it's a classic sound moment. I didn't run it by everybody, but that was the thought on the day. But, no, that was a fun day to shoot. Everybody had a blast.
Mildred, it's a long sequence. Can you talk to us about kind of shaping the dialogue of that sequence and how you built it?
You're right. It is a really long sequence. And, first of all, it's beautifully recorded because it's right? Steve, you had like probably the most control you ever had recording something. So it's impeccably recorded. It has, it's shot, we used a boom mic and everybody had their own mic. So, presenting the dialogue and getting it prepped for the mix was a pleasure. And then we used a lot of, Ai-Ling used sound effects as well, but we also were able to use a lot of the production effects, footsteps, the suitcase falling, and then Ai-Ling supplemented with effects, which they all blend, so I feel like really well. To really put you there on that sound set, and which is great because you feel it just building and building. And then it starts with a lot of control. And once again, as in a lot of scenes in this movie, explodes into utter chaos where everybody's fighting and screaming. And again, in that part of the scene, it was really, really great because since everybody was mic'd, we could really pick and choose who you want to hear at any given time. Like, for example, when Lloyd, the sound guy, walks downstairs and says, "I hear a high-pitched tone," and one of the extras goes, "It's her voice," and so it was easy to just bring that up. It was so great. Everything was there for us to use. But I have to say, there's a line in that sequence that it's always been one of my biggest fears because one of my jobs is supervising the ADR on this film. And so I always have, most of the films I work on, I go to the ADR stage and record lines with the actors. But of course, always they're usually directed by the director. But I'm always worried when I give technical notes, like Lloyd was giving, like you have to speak louder, you have to speak softer. There's one line Nellie gives where she says, Lloyd, shut up. I listen to my director, not the effing sound guy. And that's one of my biggest fears on the ADR stage is having someone say, I'm not taking direction from her, So, yeah, I love that sequence.
That's only happened to me on set a few hundred times. It's fine. You get used to it.
Yeah. And obviously it's every sound person's dream. They kill the cameraman. Sure.
Yeah. Well, he deserved it.
Yeah, the sound guy survived, so yay.
I mean, it is Babylon, how sound ruined everybody's lives. That's the full title.
Yeah. Mildred, you brought up ADR. Tell us about the recording process, and I presume you had a pretty massive loop group on this film.
Not as massive as I would have liked. I wanted much more time than I could have, but we made do. And but again, one of the ways we made this work is that, and I started doing this a while ago with Ai-Ling, because in the old days, we would just shoot like 5 times more loop group than we would end up using. But in a case like Babylon, there was so much to get and so much to record that I coordinated with Ai-Ling, and we figured out, like, she's like, I have this covered in effects. You need to get this in loop group. Or like with the scene, like at the jazz singer, the theater scenes, jazz singer, when Nellie sees her first talking and people applaud and react. Those scenes too I had to coordinate with her in terms of, like, she said, well, I have the bed, but I need little specific, this person and this person. So, it was a lot to get. And I ended up, I think I used, initially they said 2 days. So I tried to get as much as I could in 2 days. I walked in saying, I need 2 weeks. And they're like, okay, start with 2 days. Okay. So that's what I did. And then we had, a pickup day. That's right. I think it was just 2 days and a pickup day was what we did. But on the second day, but the thing that we worked on the second day was I recorded at this studio in Burbank, Aura Sound, and they have lots of individual booths. So, and I was recording loop group remotely, and they were inside. And then Ai-Ling appeared at the second half of the day in the evening with John Chazelle and Toby Pope. And was there anybody else too? Was that it? Was there a third person recording Ai-Ling? John and Toby, and you, right? And yes, and so they were outside in the parking lot. So even though we had that it was 1 day of loop group, that second day of loop group, it was actually double time because they were in the parking lot recording recording the loop group for the exterior scenes, like the battle scene, when Nellie gets mobbed by her fans. So we were doing like both, working simultaneously to get with the same group, kind of rotating them inside and outside.
Ai-Ling, I'd love to hear a little bit about the mix process. I mean, I know from my conversations with Andy Nelson, he loves his DFC board. You obviously you're doing your sound design and editorial in Pro Tools. Do you continue working on a Pro Tools control surface when you go into the mixing mode, or do you switch to a console as well?
I have my little weird small Essex setup. Not the usual setup, but
what's weird about your setup? What are you doing?
I only use like 16 faders, and then I only have like 8 of those. I have like with the knot module and the automation module, and then the other 8 faders is mostly my like VCAs and whatnot. And it's just like a very compact setup rather than the traditional, fader and all the automation and knot module setup. I have this habit that as I'm like cutting things together, I would kind of pre-mix as I move along, and staying in the same mix template from then on through to the final. We would edit in like 7.1 monitoring format, and then before the pre-dubs, then I would add the object tracks and stuff. So to play around with the Atmos stuff from pre-dub onwards.
I see. So you're working in 7.1 as you're designing, but then when you go onto a stage, then you move into Atmos.
More people may nowadays like start with the Atmos format, but it's just because of the whole office locations and stuff where I was on Babylon. But I think even with that, it lends itself, pretty seamlessly, going into pre-dubbing mode and final mode in Atmos.
Well, before I let you go, since you brought up Dolby Atmos, and of course we're on the Dolby podcast, I want to ask you, what are your favorite Dolby Atmos moments in this mix for folks who have the chance to see it in the format in the theater, or certainly a lot of folks have great home Atmos systems now when the film comes to streaming. So what are your favorite Atmos moments from the mix?
The good thing about Atmos, besides all the overheads and stuff, is that the surrounds are full range, and so in the case of say like the Nellie's kinescope arrival scene, because like we have all this music and like dialogue and like activities like constantly like a 360 feel around us. I think it does a great job in immersing us into that world and allows us to like crisscross all these layers of sounds and build them into this like climatic cacophony in the scene. And also, with so much music in Babylon, it's so like to feel the music and stuff like with the say like the end sequence when like in Manny's vision during that montage, there's this whole like free jazz music from like Justin, and like I remember like Andy, they were like panning a lot of the drums all around the room, and same thing with Atmos, the full range, you can feel the pumping rhythm of the drums and stuff all around you during like the kaleidoscopic visuals.
Millie, Steve, how about you?
I have to agree with Ai-Ling. Just the fact that you can have the full range of Dolby Atmos in the theater and have that experience the way that it's mixed is the most important thing, I think, and that brings in the audience. I can't say I have a specific favorite scene, but I have everything that happens before the opening title, which is probably 40 minutes of the movie. To me, it's just such a great use of Dolby Atmos and to just get you locked into the movie and know what kind of ride you're on.
I agree with them too, and I especially like Ai-Ling love that scene where Nellie arrives at Kinescope. I feel like it just brings you right into that world, and it sounds great. I love it.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. I know it's early morning and you guys have a full workday ahead of you. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about Babylon. It's really a remarkable film, and congratulations on making the sound shortlist for the Academy Awards. I'm curious, we've got the Bake Off coming up this weekend. What sequence did you pick to show at the Bake Off this weekend?
Oh, you'll have to watch it.
That one, Kinescope.
The kinescope scene, of course. I should have guessed that. That's a great choice.
Movie magic,
well,
movie making.
Yep.
Yeah. Good luck this weekend.
Thank you.
No, thank you. It's an honor.
Thanks again for coming
lots
on the
of
show.
great films this year.
Thank you, Glenn.
Great sounding.
Thank you,
movies.
Glenn.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Ai-Ling, Mildred, and Steve for joining us today. Babylon is now playing in theaters in Dolby Atmos. We will have a link to the film, as always, in our show notes. But before you go, please make sure you are subscribed to us, the Dolby Institute podcast. We're in the thick of awards season, so you can look forward to even more spirited conversations just like this one to help you fill out your Oscar ballot, whether you are an Academy voter or you simply want to do better in your annual office pool. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms in our show notes, or you can just search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, thanks again for joining us. This is the Dolby Institute podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, and additional editing by Matt Nixon, with production support by Taylor Hines, and our production coordinator is Sunny Chen. Thank you for listening.